Hi, my name's Mark, and I'm going to take a little break from the usual cactus husbandry videos that this channel is famous for, and instead today I'm going to talk about... Now, even though this video is specifically centered around books, the ideas I'm going to be talking about could apply to any hobby. In fact, I'd be surprised if anyone watching hasn't experienced at least one of the things that I'm about to talk about. I'm going to touch on gatekeeping as I've seen it in certain circles, as well as the role of taste in recommending books, what you value in a book, and a few other things that can come into play when someone even inadvertently puts pressure on you to read something because they believe that everyone should. I do have a few points to lay down before I talk more about this, and I want to start by saying that I don't believe there is a wrong way to enjoy books or media in general, but as I said, this video is going to center on books. I'm not looking to tell certain people that how I think they enjoy reading is wrong. I'm looking more so to talk to the people like me who have felt pressure and gatekeeping about their hobby and how I think that's kind of unfair. There's also a video that I came across recently that is quite different to what I'm making today, but has a similar positive outlook that I would like to channel in this video. The video is from popular booktuber The Book Leo, and it's just quite affirming and wholesome about the hobby of reading. I'll link that video as well as another one by Christiane Jones which inspired the Book Leo's video because I think they're really nice to watch. I also don't want to, in this video, diminish the idea of certain books being important. There are more reasons to read than to just enjoy a story, and there are books out there which are relevant to our world, our cultures, our societies in ways that make them important. But when I talk about must-read books, I mean it more in a gatekeeping way, and that's a good place to start. Part 1. Gatekeeping as a term has many different meanings in many different contexts, but the way that I normally hear it used centers around fandom. Specifically the idea of telling someone they are not a real fan for some reason, but that's not the only way that it comes up. The reasons that people do this can all be very different because, you know, people are individuals who act differently, and as I said, it can also come out in different ways. You don't have to be using the exact phrase real fans to be gatekeeping. You just have to be putting extra qualifiers on what it means to be a fan. So let's take an example. Let's say I wanted to call myself a James Bond fan. No Time to Die in cinemas now. And just because it's an example doesn't mean it can't be true. I do like Bond movies. It's one of those franchises that I feel like boys in the 2000s, which I was, were kind of expected to enjoy. And I mean, I did play a fair bit of GoldenEye on the N64 and Nightfire on the PS2, but I don't think I've actually seen a Pierce Brosnan Bond movie all the way through, except for Die Another Day, which is one of those DVDs that my family just had. I don't know where it came from, but of course I watched it like 5 times. And I've actually seen all of the Daniel Craig Bonds in the cinema, including No Time to Die, the movie critics are calling good, probably some of them. So I could be considered fairly knowledgeable by some standards, but I'm sure there are still fans out there, hopefully in the minority, who would tell me that I'm not a real fan because I've only seen the 6 most recent films and some half-remembered clips of the other 19 from when I was a kid. So that would be gatekeeping. But what about the person who's telling me that I'm not a fan? Maybe they've seen all 25 Bond films, but does that make them a real fan? Their favourite Bond is Sean Connery, and everyone knows you're not a true fan unless you recognise the subtle genius of George Lazenby. And as well as that, they might have seen all the canon films, but if you haven't seen the 1967 version of Casino Royale, as well as the non-Eon produced Never Say Never Again, for the wider context of Bond as a character, can you even call yourself a fan? Actually, while we're going there, weren't they based on books? Surely you can't even begin to think of yourself as being into 007 if you haven't read the 14 Fleming novels, the 30 novels that came out after he died, and as many short stories as there are, as well as the Young Bond series, the Moneypenny Diaries, and the comic books. There are actually 30 James Bond novels that have come out since Ian Fleming's death. I looked it up. I assume you can see where I'm going with this because it's not particularly subtle. Drawing lines between who's a fan and who isn't can fall apart pretty quickly. And it's pointless anyway, because isn't it good, actually, if someone also likes something that you do? If you have arbitrary qualifiers, then what's stopping someone else from turning around and saying, actually, no, it's you who isn't the fan? Which would also be bad, because even if someone else is gatekeeping you, if you turn around and do the same to them, you're just reinforcing the practice. Now, for this example, Bond could be considered not a unique case, but definitely an uncommon one just because of how many films, books, games there are, but gatekeeping isn't constrained to one franchise. If you take something like music in general or fantasy books, you'll find plenty of people who have opinions on what you should or shouldn't listen to or read, which is fair. Recommendations can be helpful, and I know that when I was getting into fantasy, I looked up a lot of videos and articles on what I should read, and there's just so much. Specifically, there's so much that's loved by so many people, and that can be hard because you want to be involved and you want to read good things, but there's only so many hours in a day, and you don't always feel like reading, and then your hobby turns into a chore, and you strive to read as much as possible and use all your free time to achieve that. I'm not going to drift too far into this issue because I'll get off the topic of books and onto the topic of like the internet and capitalism and commodifying your hobbies, so instead I'll talk about what you can read. Again, taking fantasy books as an example, if you look up lists of what to read, you're going to find a lot of different recommendations from different people. As part of that, you might get recommended classics of the genre like Lord of the Rings or Earthsea, as well as more modern epics like The Wheel of Time. Those three series alone encompass 23 books and a collection of short stories, just including their mainline series. And The Lord of the Rings released in the 50s, while Earthsea's first trilogy concluded in 1972. These are older books, ones that obviously have a lot of staying power, but they're recommended on top of books from the last 5-10 years or ones that are just coming out now, and eventually all these recommendations get a bit overwhelming. I was talking to someone recently about TV shows in a way that can be used to parallel this. It was at this point that the light of the day began to fail, but don't worry, I do set up a light at the start of part 2. I don't watch a lot of shows, even though TV is more accessible than ever now that we have so many streaming services and more high quality shows than ever before, and at least part of that can be boiled down to an overabundance of choice. If that quick bit earlier about No Time to Die didn't firmly date this video as autumn 2021, then let me try this. Squid Game is pretty popular right now, and though I do think I would enjoy it if I watched it, every time someone mentions it I think, oh yeah, but I still haven't watched The Queen's Gambit, and I wanted to watch that when it came out. And then I think about other things that I haven't watched yet, like WandaVision. That was so big when it came out, but I still haven't watched it. Or what about The Sopranos? I've heard barely anyone say a bad thing about that show, so I should obviously watch that, right? But I'm probably never going to because I'm paralyzed by choice with this stuff. Not only is there a lot of good hashtag content to consume, there's always more coming out to the point that I'll never be able to keep up. I'm not watching the new shows and films, but I also haven't seen a lot of the ones that people consider classic and important. And if I ever try to catch up on a select high quality few, there's still the chance that I won't like them, or that someone will say, no, you shouldn't have watched this, you should watch this, and all the while other things are still releasing, and I fall further and further behind. Because of the abundance of works to read or watch or eat or whatever, and the fear that maybe you'll read the wrong thing and how that can feel like an opportunity cost of not reading something else, it's really easy to get hung up on this stuff. At least, it is for me. I think the only thing you can do then is to find where your tastes lie and read that. It feels like there's no right way to do it, but I don't think this is the wrong way, at least. Maybe. Part 2. Part of me thought like, yeah, I'll get this video done before I don't have enough light in the sky, but I forgot that it's October. It's like the middle of October and it's Ireland, so of course I didn't have enough light, but now I have a very janky light setup to help me. Obviously, taste plays a huge part in the recommendations that you make, in the books that you read, basically in every aspect of enjoying whichever entertainment medium you choose. Taste is literally the thing that determines what you enjoy. And like a few other parts of this video, here is an obvious statement that I still feel like I need to lay out. Tastes vary wildly. Art and media are subjective because I believe that we as people enjoying them are inherently subjective ourselves. Something that I don't want to do in my videos, because I try not to do it in real life, is to state my opinion as fact. Whenever I hear a reviewer or anyone really say that something is good or bad, I understand that this is just them expressing an opinion they have based on their tastes, but I never like that phrasing. I try to say that I like something or that it didn't resonate with me personally, because even though most people do use good or bad to describe subjective feelings, there are some people out there who seem unable to account for taste and therefore can't understand when someone else thinks something is good that they know is bad. This can coincide with gatekeeping, where someone might dismiss something that you like and use it to discredit you. Like telling you you're not a real Arctic Monkeys fan because you like their weird 60s lounge music concept album. Nobody's actually told me that exactly, but I have been judged for liking that album as much as I do. But taste isn't only important in the context of gatekeeping, it's important in its own right. Enough at least for me to make this whole part just about that, so let's talk about it. While I might come off like I'm taking the term must read too literally, the term itself doesn't leave much room for taste. When I see it, I feel like there's something wrong with me if I don't want to read these books. Just the way that most of these articles are framed, it's as if they want you to feel judged and pressured by them. When you read some of these articles, particularly ones that talk about must-read books of all time, you can probably guess the kind of books that come up. Now, to clarify, I'm not trying to rag on these books if you enjoy them, and like, I have read some of them as well, but they do come up multiple times. Books like The Handmaid's Tale, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, The Catcher in the Rye, To Kill a Mockingbird, 1984, Slaughterhouse-Five, The Great Gatsby, The Lord of the Rings, Lord of the Fly, Lord's companion novel to her new album Solar Power. No, that last one was a dream. But you get the idea. I know that I've heard a lot about all of these books many times over, and there's a good chance that you've read at least one of them, possibly in school. They're considered true classics, and among the best books ever written. But why does any of that matter if they're not the kind of books that you enjoy? Like I said in the intro, there are, of course, more reasons to read a book than just pure enjoyment, and many of these books would count as important, and I'm not going to take that away from them. But I've been a new reader, and when all of these books are pitched as must-reads, you're probably going to end up trying at least one of them, and if you don't like it, then you might end up feeling bad because are you not able to appreciate this amazing book or something? And I know that this can happen because it happened to me. I've only been as big a reader as I am now for the last 2 years or so, and when I was first getting into reading I came across my fair share of recommendations like anyone might. And to use the common list of must-read books that I just talked about, I've read 3 of them. When I was 14, my English class studied To Kill a Mockingbird, and I thought it was interesting. I didn't hate it, but I have no desire to ever read it again. It definitely wouldn't be a good recommendation based on my tastes. Slaughterhouse-Five is a book that I only read last year when I was getting into books, and I liked it, 3 stars. I found the frame story and the non-linear structure to be really interesting actually, but again, if it wasn't considered such a classic, I probably would have never picked it up based on the premise. It's just not a good recommendation for what I like to read. And the last book of those I mentioned earlier which I've read is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. This is the book on my list that probably fits the best with my tastes, and that's kind of why it felt way worse when I didn't like it. Actually, to kill 2 mockingbirds with one stone here, I felt the same way reading Hitchhikers as I did when I read Mort by Terry Pratchett. There were some funny moments, and then I didn't really enjoy much else at all. I can say this easily now and accept anyone who disagrees, but when I read these 2 classic authors of their genre who everyone talks about as if it's just a given that everyone likes them if they like sci-fi fantasy, I was genuinely worried because I didn't really enjoy them. Now maybe this is just a me thing, but I feel like there has to be somebody out there who felt the same way when they were getting into reading or some other hobby. What I mean is the feeling that there's an expectation to enjoy certain things, and though it's accepted that sure you mightn't like some stuff, these are the author or series or whatever that everyone loves and appreciates. And though it can just be someone expressing their love for a certain work, sometimes it feels like it puts pressure on you. I really feel like if I hadn't found other sci-fi fantasy books that I liked before I read Hitchhiker's Guide or Mort or The Fifth Season, which yes is another critically acclaimed book that I'm not that into, I probably would have just thought that the whole thing wasn't for me. But that's not true. Those things just aren't my taste, and that's fine. And though I was questioning myself since I didn't like them, like I said, I had read some things in the genre that I did like, and so I quickly started to realize like, hey, no, there's stuff out there that I enjoy, it's just a matter of taste. So when someone exalts, say, a novel and deems it must read for everybody, it just loses all meaning for me. I read to find stories and escapism that I enjoy, like a lot of other people. So I reject this idea of book lists that I have to tick off to say like, yes, I am a reader, I've read all the good novels. Because I don't care what the good novels are, I care which ones I like. And that's too heavily dependent on my taste to boil down to universal must-read books. Part 3. This is kind of an offshoot of taste, but I felt like the video would flow better if that section wasn't any longer. Another aspect of recommendations that I feel should be heavily focused on when you're either doing the recommending or researching for yourself is what you value. Something that I've learned over the last 2 years or so is that people look for very different things in books. In fact, I think that calling yourself a reader can be too broad at times since books themselves are so varied. Fiction, non-fiction, poetry, short stories, I would consider all of these their own unique medium, even though if you read any of them you could be described as a reader. And while someone could of course enjoy more than one of these, someone else could just as easily not. Personally, I read mostly fiction, so I wouldn't have too much overlap with someone who reads overwhelmingly in, say, non-fiction. But even with other readers of fiction there's a huge difference. Genre is the easy difference to point out, but there's something else that took me longer to identify, which I think plays as much if not a greater role in figuring out whether you'll like a book. I'm going to use another example to explain this because I like examples and it's my video, you can't stop me. As I said, I got into reading around the start of 2020, and during that year I read pretty widely. I read fiction, non-fiction, contemporary, classics, but most of all I read fantasy. When I spoke earlier about having read something I really liked before I read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there wasn't any one book, but there were definitely 3 standouts. The first 2 books in Patrick Rothfuss's Kingkiller Chronicle, and the first book in Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series. I actually have all 3 of those books on the shelf behind me, but I'm just too lazy to grab them. The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss is a book that a friend of mine was trying to get me to read for a very long time, and it ended up becoming, I realize as I record this, the first adult fantasy book I ever read. I was really taken by the book, and even though I don't think it's perfect by any means, I really enjoyed it and its sequel, The Wise Man's Fear, when I first read them. And then Brandon Sanderson came along, and within 9 months I had read every published Cosmere novel, novella, and short story. But the thing about reading these 2 very different authors is that I enjoyed them both, and then a few months after I finished reading both of them, I saw a live stream which had someone describe Patrick Rothfuss as a modern day Shakespeare, and I had also seen some criticism online about Sanderson's prose, and I realized something. I had never noticed a difference. If you're someone who really likes and pays attention to prose in novels and you've read both of these authors, you might think that it's impossible because they're in such vastly different leagues. Apparently, so I've been told, but I just never noticed. This was the start of me really honing in on the things that I enjoy about the books that I read, and prose is obviously not one of them. I'm a very visual thinker, and that translates over to reading, so that when I read something, I'm imagining every single detail as if I'm there watching it. So it doesn't really matter if the words on the page are particularly beautiful. If I'm enjoying a book, it's much more likely that I'm so in the moment that I don't even pay attention to the words. And this is probably one of the main reasons that I'm such a big Brando Sando fanboy. His prose is often cited as his weakest aspect, especially in his earlier stories, but it doesn't affect my experience at all. That being said, I'm sure I'd notice if something in a book was particularly bad, as I do now sometimes when I pick out a line that I feel is particularly good. But if someone was to recommend me a book based mainly on an interesting or beautiful writing style, it would probably be lost on me. Not only do we put stock in certain categories and genres, we each value some aspects of books above others, whether it's characters, prose, plot, or anything else. There are probably even people out there whose favourite aspects of reading are things that I don't even realise are parts of a book. So when you have people reading for totally different reasons, sometimes enjoying the same book for different reasons or different books for the same reasons, how do you effectively recommend while taking these preferences into account? You can't, really, because preference and enjoyment are so personal. You could have a book or a show or a film that does everything wrong by your usual standards, and you still might end up really enjoying it for a vague reason you can't even articulate. But at the end of the day, for me, it's all about how I feel. I'll stop reading something if I'm not enjoying it, and I'll keep reading it if I am, even if something tells me that I shouldn't be. Part 4. I'm going to mention 2 more ideas that I came up with while writing this, which didn't really fit into any other part, and they're pretty short anyway. Like I spoke earlier about people using objective language for subjective opinions, when people tell you you need to read something, they're not always doing it for gatekeepy reasons. A lot of the time they're just big fans and they want other people to enjoy it too, especially if it's been an important part of their life. Now, this is purely based off of anecdotal evidence, but I found that when people grew up with a piece of media that they love, they tend to be very fierce about recommending it to others who haven't seen it, and I'm not exempt from this. Nostalgia is a huge factor in our enjoyment of film or books or food even, and though as we get older we realise that not everyone has had the same experience that we have, I've still seen people and felt myself that jump of like, oh my god, they haven't seen this. How did they have a childhood without it? I've been on the receiving end of this most often when it comes up that as a kid, the only Disney movie I watched was The Lion King, and this tends to happen to me the most when others tell me that they never watched The Simpsons growing up. I don't think this feeling is inherently bad, it's quite hard to control and very reactionary, just as long as your logical brain kicks in to say, it's okay that this person hasn't seen something that I love, we all have different experiences. And when on the receiving end of this, I just try to remind myself that it's great someone loves this thing so much that they want me to experience it as well. But I just don't really like 2D animated Disney that much. I'm sorry. Another source of pressure when it comes to reading certain kinds of books comes from a place that I mentioned briefly earlier: school. Now, I'm putting my hands up. I know that English teachers are not all the same and shouldn't be judged the same. They're their own unique people, but a lot of them really do love to recommend books that I just do not vibe with. And that's okay. I'm sure anybody watching this could have had their favourite book recommended to them by an English teacher, but I know that my tastes fall on the more commercial fiction side, which I never had any of my teachers even talk about. And on from this, I've even heard people say that they don't like reading anymore because they were forced to read books they hated in school, even some of the ones I mentioned earlier. But that's not the fault of teachers, that's more to do with the planning of large-scale public school systems, of which I have very little knowledge. Though I will say that unlike my experience in the Irish school system, where the most modern book we read was 40 years old by the time we read it in class, I have heard of some teachers in the US using more contemporary novels to teach their classes, even like John Green when he was very popular, which is pretty cool. I can't relate, but I hope that anyone who experienced that enjoyed it. So I don't blame English teachers, and I also know that the point of school isn't to read books that you like, but I still do kind of blame the school system that I went through for definitely holding some books in much higher regard than others without taking any personal taste into account. Part 5. I don't want this to come off as me telling you why it's wrong for people to feel this way about books that they consider must-reads. They're not wrong. If I was to say that this is the wrong way to enjoy books because my experience is different, then I'd be belittling their experience. That's not the point here. The point is to acknowledge that there are different ways that people can be involved with literature, and to recognize that and celebrate it so that more people can enjoy the hobby. When it comes to my own personal experience, there could be a whole other conversation about why I feel the need to maximize my enjoyment of books instead of just enjoying the journey or building up opinions or critically thinking about why some classics are important or not. But again, that's not what this video is about, and I don't think I could dissect that anyway, because at the end of the day, all I want to do is read and enjoy myself while I do it, not have to worry about reading the right book or the important book all the time. And it's okay to be in the same boat as me or not. If you read and it has a net positive impact on your life, whether that's in the form of enjoyment or food for thought or anything else, then you're doing it right. And if you want to be told what to read, then you're doing it right. The same as if you never listen to recommendations. It's my hobby, it's my experience, so I'll read however I want, and no one can tell me what I am or what I'm not because of it. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I hope it didn't come across as too rambly or anything. This is only my second time making content for YouTube, and though I've been a fan for a while, it's a lot different when I sit down to write and I realize just the amount of effort that gets put in by people who make long, high quality video essays. My last video was about a Brandon Sanderson book, and this video is obviously about books in general. I'm not exactly sure what my niche for this channel will end up being because I do have quite a few different interests, but for the moment it's just been a bit of fun and a good way to keep up some writing practice. Don't forget to let me know in the comments if you're a Brando Sando fanbo or a Patfus Rothrick stan, and no, you cannot be both or you're not a real fantasy fan. But really, I'd love to hear the aspects that you value most in a book, and if there's something like me with prose that you just don't really pay attention to. Also, I'm sorry if it pained anyone to hear that I don't pay attention to prose when I read. I know it's like the main reason that some people read fiction, but I can't change who I am. It is what it is. If you enjoyed this, feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe, make a blood sacrifice, whatever you're feeling up to today. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Or you will see me, because that's how cameras work. Bye!